Hey everybody, Zee Garcia here, and today I'm going to be doing a little top 10, a little personal top 10 of best edition improvements that I've come across from previous editions to then later editions, second edition, third, what have you. I've played a lot of games that I found to be perfectly fine, and then I play a later edition and realize how much better it could have been. I think a lot of these fall into that category. They change up something. It's a new look, new mechanics, all sorts of things. And I figured I would just discuss some of these things today. So let's go ahead and jump into it, starting with, of course, number 10. At number 10, I've got Mission Red Planet. This is a second edition of Mission Red Planet that had come out before. It was a game I did enjoy, but was a game that had a couple of production issues. It was an Asmodee edition originally, and this was before Asmodee was sort of a juggernaut in the industry. The new edition, or the later edition, I should say, not really new anymore, is one that added a few things I knew were in the original design ideas for the game that had been scrapped to produce the game. Things like having the moon of Phobos be its own space on the board or adjacent to the board, that you could also send your astronauts to that location, and then they could sometimes jump onto Mars itself and start controlling the area. Production quality here is very good. It's a nice step up from the original one. Lovely artwork, very good. The original one had good artwork, but this new one, or later one, was much better, I would say. The just some of the mechanical things, some of the chaos was a little reined in. Some of the ideas that were put in place were just general improvements. It does come in at number 10, not the biggest leap that I've got on the list here, but a very good second edition, and one I would very much recommend for those of you who enjoy area control games and you like your sci-fi fast and loose. So, number 10, Mission Red Planet. My number 9 goes to Citadels, and I'm talking here specifically about the big box edition that came out in 2016. Citadels has been reprinted a billion times. There have been many, many editions, and in fact, this is not even the newest edition. They've already done another one in a smaller box, keeping all the content, but sort of shrinking some of it down to fit in a smaller, cheaper box. But I like the big box edition. I thought this version of the game knocked it out of the park. They gave you everything from the original game. In some cases, some of those cards tightened up a little bit. This game is from the year 2000, so it's got a lot of years. Then they gave you everything that came out in the original expansion, The Dark City. Again, tightened up a little bit. And then a whole bunch of things that showed up for the first time in this box here. New concepts, new ideas, new characters, new cards. And you could mix and match all of these things. The character cards were large format tarot-sized cards, brand new artwork on everything across the board, which is the artwork they're currently using in the latest printing. Lovely coins for the gold in the game, a nice crown for the crowned player, the king normally in the game. Yeah, this is just a spectacular edition of Citadels. I've owned a couple of different editions in the past, but I think this one, for me, is going to stand the test of time as sort of the ultimate edition, with all the content that exists, pretty much, with a lovely production, great quality cards, a spectacular rule book that explains how you can mix and match everything. Just a fantastic one. So unless you're pressed for space, in which case I would recommend the newest printing of the game, which, you're not giving up any content, then I would recommend this one. I think this one is just a really fantastic production of Citadels. That is the sort of bigger box edition that came out in 2016. At number 8, I've got a critical darling here. This is Camel Up, second edition. I remember playing Camel Up when it first came out, when it was getting some awards buzz, and I found myself quite underwhelmed by it. And in fact, I pushed it out of my mind for a few years. And then when the new edition came out with new artwork, with a different production, I thought that I almost felt like I had missed something the first time around. This new edition had Very well-produced pyramid. They use as basically a dice shaker. It had great artwork. It had some content that had come out previously, not in the core box, included into it. The whole thing was streamlined. It was... Now the production quality sort of matched the level that the game needed. And, of course, going into it the second time, expecting a kooky, chaotic, wild camel gambling game certainly helped. But still, I would have a hard time right now going back to the previous edition of this game with the fiddly pyramid with the rubber band and the whole thing. It was just not a great production for a game that needed a little bit more. And I'm assuming the awards attention allowed them to do something like this for the follow-up. But yeah, Camel Up 2nd Edition, the one to get if you want a big group chaotic gambling game and you like the silliness that this one is going to bring to the table. So Camel Up 2nd Edition. Number 7 is a game not a lot of people have heard about, and probably fewer people still have played. This is a game called Gem Rush. Gem Rush has a reprint, had a 2nd edition of it. The original one, well, they're both from Victory Point Games. And Victory Point Games does not tend to normally make very high quality products. And by that I mean physically high quality. They have laser cut tokens that you need to wipe down. In fact, they include a napkin for you to wipe down these pieces. Card quality is not the best normally. But Gem Rush, which I did used to own in the original printing, was a superb game, is a superb game. That I put up with some of those component limitations in order to enjoy the game. It was worth it. It was this game that you could play cooperatively or competitively. It worked in both. You were exploring this dungeon and then trying to earn gems, get victory points. They then reprinted, and Victory Point Games started a line that was sort of their premium line with better component qualities, nicer boxes, and this one they got new artwork. They reworked a lot of the content to be symbolically driven instead of having a bunch of writing on the cards. And it really works. Card quality is much better. They have a couple of variants included in the box. You can choose to add or not add. The game is now, it really feels like it can show its true and full potential in Gem Rush 2nd Edition. It's a game I very much enjoy. It's one I feel is pretty criminally underrated. And one that I often will bring out if I'm playing with folks that have sort of seen everything and they want to try something a little bit different. This is a really fun game. Some chaos, a little kookiness, but a lot of fun and interest. So Gem Rush 2nd Edition. I mentioned a little bit ago how Citadels had a bunch of expansions. Well, they certainly have not had as many as Cosmic Encounter, which is my number 6 pick here. And the version I'm picking as the one to sort of blow them all away is the Fantasy Flight Games edition of Cosmic Encounter. This one has quite a bit of content right out of the box, but above and beyond that, they have supported this game tremendously. In fact, they just announced a new expansion when we all sort of thought it was done after quite a few of them. This one has a lot of new artwork, all new artwork, really good artwork, tightened up rules in many cases. They've sort of broken down in a very Fantasy Flight way timing windows of when alien powers and specific cards can be triggered. They've just brought everything together, modernized the entire thing from a game that came out originally in 1977, like I said. The one thing that I do still miss from my old, I think it was Mayfair edition, was single-use flares. A flare in this game is a specific alien power on a card that you can play to do something. But if you happen to have the flare that is your own alien's flare, you get a souped-up power. They used to be, in that edition that I'm talking about from Mayfair, you would play them one time, they would go away. They'd do something fantastic. Many of the other editions, including the Fantasy Flight edition, you play them, they do something. It's better if it's your own. And then you get it back into your hand. Some people like that, some people don't. I do prefer the do it and it goes away because it's simpler, because, there's no timing issues and problems. But that's nitpicking, you know. This one has had a lot of support, like I said, beautiful production, and the game is just a blast. So it's wonderful to have an edition like this one of a classic game like this one that will continue to be discovered by new folks entering the hobby, or maybe those wanting to go back in time a little bit and rediscover some classics. So, Cosmic Encounter from Fantasy Flight Games, my number 6. Number 5 for me is Caper Europe. Now, Caper, which was the original game, had gone through a few editions as well. Caper Europe sort of acknowledges that it's a reworking of Caper. I would certainly say it's a reworking of Caper, but it doesn't have that subtitle in there. And some of the ideas here that were reworked, that were tweaked, I think make the game a lot more streamlined and way easier to bring to the table. Caper was already a game I adored. It's a game I think is fantastic. A 2-player game in which you have a team of thieves going to different places, breaking in and getting loot. Sort of a tug-of-war style game. Caper Europe manages to take away some of the busy work, if you would, some of the mental gymnastics you had to do to keep track of various things by imbuing them into the game itself, by giving you a physical tracker that you can pull towards you or your opponent pulls towards them so that you do not have to remember and recount symbols on the board. And that's just one of many little changes that they added to the game in order to make it easier to play. It's a game that showed me how sort of annoying it was to keep track of various things in Caper that I didn't even think about until I played Caper Europe and realized, oh boy, this is so much better, so much cleaner, so much easier. I can't see myself going back to the previous edition. So Caper Europe, if you like 2-player games, this is one it's very close to that list of me just simply recommending, as long as you like 2-player games. Not a whole lot else I'm going to check on you with. Just try it out. You're very likely to enjoy this one. Caper Europe, my number 5. Up next, I'm talking about Fury of Dracula, and I'm talking about here specifically 3rd edition Fury of Dracula. I've never played the original The Fury of Dracula, the 1st edition, but I had played and enjoyed Fury of Dracula 2nd edition, which I thought was a good game, if a little clunky perhaps. It showed its age a little bit. Fury of Dracula 3rd edition was a pretty big change, as I understand it was from 1st to 2nd. It made the game a little more dynamic. It tightened up combat to be more interesting, to be less random, to be more about a game of wits and sort of double guessing than a game of rolling a single 6-sided die and seeing who bested the other, and then having the card you actually chose matter at that point. In the new printing here, the 3rd edition, of which there was also a reprint from another company, but they're basically identical. So third and 4th editions, I believe, are basically the same. So 3rd edition is the one I have, and it's just a little more dynamic is the best way I can put it. The turns go back and forth a little more interestingly. Card combat and character abilities and all of these things are more engaging. The game just feels more modern, while still retaining some of those big, grandiose, long expectations that it puts into place. So I really enjoyed it. Fury of Dracula is pretty much a classic, and I think this edition is the best one that I've certainly played. I assume the best one that they've ever done. My number 3 is a little bit of a cheat, because I've actually not played the 1st edition of this game, but I've heard enough about it, I'm aware enough of it, where I can safely put it on the list. And it's so high on the list because the differences from 1st edition to 2nd are enormous. I'm talking about Mansions of Madness, 2nd edition. The original Mansions of Madness was not an app-assisted game. The 2nd edition of Mansions of Madness absolutely requires that you download the app and play the game. The app will run many, many things for you, as well as play a little creepy music to keep you entertained. In the original game, you could certainly have you'd have a player who would run the game, and the game was susceptible to that player possibly making a mistake, maybe missing something, maybe giving you a moment where they realize, oh wait, I did that wrong, I set this up incorrectly, what have you. With the app assistance in play, it is so smooth, it is so immersive. I would say this is one of the most immersive games I've ever played. And yet it retains that sort of mystery, right? That creepiness. The app does not overwhelm the game, does not become merely a video game. It just gives you a guide. It holds your hand, takes you through it without you having to digest an entire long rule book, without you having to do a lot of mental gymnastics to prepare to play this game. Very engaging, very immersive, really enjoyable game, and one that, because of the music and everything else going on in it and the app implementation, is able to do things that you can't do in a lot of other Cthulhu mythos or spooky games. Give you puzzles, give you creepy moments, give you interesting results that you don't expect until you tell it, I got this many successes. Well, here's what happened then. I really enjoy that. Manchester Madness 2nd Edition, fantastic game. Number 2, I would say, is without a doubt the biggest leap from the previous edition to the 2nd edition, and this is Nemo's War, 2nd edition. This is a solitaire, generally a solitaire game in which you are going to represent Nemo and his ship, the Nautilus, and you are moving around the world, the oceans of the world, having encounters, rolling dice, managing your crew and your ship's hull and your supplies, things like that, trying to do the best you can, trying to not attract the world's powers to what you are doing, or they will come after you very heavily. This is a lovely production of a very interesting game, a game that feels in many instances both modern and like an old American game, very much set in its ways. The original printing of this comes in a Ziploc bag, and it has very low quality components. It is a game that it's simply night and day compared to the nice boxed edition that you can get right now. It's a very unique system. It's a very interesting game, one that absolutely stands out in my collection, not only because it's a solitaire-only game, but because of the style of game it is, this sort of story-driven, heavy, complex game that yet still manages to feel very engaging. I really like it. I think Nemo's War 2nd Edition is a fantastic system, but boy, compared to that first one, you could barely draw lines in between those two things. So I knew it was going to be high up on my list. That's Nemo's War 2nd Edition. And then finally, my number 1 is a game I enjoy both in the original edition and the 2nd edition, but the second one is simply a stunning production. It's a much improved game, and I've played it quite a bit, so that doesn't hurt. This is Atlantis Rising, 2nd edition. The original game is one very few people played. It's one I owned for many years. And in it, you represented a person in Atlantis who was attempting to build this cosmic gate and evacuate the island before it sank underneath you. The cooperation in it, and this is probably the one of the two biggest knocks against it, was sort of pandemic-esque. And by that I mean you'd have a special ability that meant you were better at one thing and really should do that thing in order to try to win the game. And often, therefore, it would cast a player as the combat person. And you should really not try to do all these other things like collect resources or help build the machine or do anything else. Go do combat. Oh, you're good at this thing? Go do that. And therefore, it could get a little stale. The other thing that was quite punishing was an attack that would hit you round after round, which was pretty luck-based. It would be based on a die roll and could sometimes be nothing, something you could shrug off. Sometimes would be very punishing. So a little lucky. The new edition, the cooperation has risen quite a bit, no pun intended, and you now really have to communicate with the other players. Above and beyond that, the new look is fantastic. The game includes a lot of ways to modify the difficulty through many gradients, and you can pretty much make this game exactly the difficulty you want it to be by including or removing various things. And again, just a stellar production. This is one of the most beautiful games I own, and I love cooperative games. You bring those two things together, this is a match made in heaven for me. So Atlantis Rising 2nd Edition, I figured was going to be on my list right away, and ends up being my #1 improvement from a previous edition to a follow-up edition. So there you go, everybody. That is my top 10 list. Let me know in the comments below if you agree, disagree with me, and which ones I missed here. This is, of course, not an exhaustive list. I can only include things I'm aware of or thought deserved a spot on the list. So I want to know what you thought. Which ones did I miss? Which ones are absolutely improvements that are tangible from a previous edition to a later edition? And that's going to do it. My name is Zee Garcia. Thank you very much. I'll see you on the next one.